Hi viewers, welcome to the second section of the course, Conquering Components and Directives. In this section, we will start off by using decorators to build and style a simple component, passing members from a parent component to a child component and binding the native element attributes. Then, we would move on to registering handlers on native browser events, generating and capturing custom events using event emitter, and attaching behavior to DOM elements with directives. Later, we will learn about projecting nested content using ngContent and using ngFor and ngIf structural directives for model-based DOM control. We will also learn referencing elements using template variables, attribute property binding, and utilizing component lifecycle hooks. Next, we'll see referencing a parent component from a child component. Lastly, we will learn configuring mutual parent-child awareness with viewChild and forward-ref and configuring mutual parent-child awareness with content-child and forward-ref. Now we move on to the first video using decorators to build and style a simple component. This video describes the building blocks of implementing an Angular 2 component. Directives, as you came to know them in Angular 1, have been done away with. In their place, we have two new entities, components and the new version of directives. Angular 2 applications are now component-driven. With further exposure, you will discover why this style is superior. Much of the syntax is entirely new and may seem strange at first. Fear not. The underpinnings of the Angular 2 style are elegant and marvelous once completely understood. Let's get started with our video. When writing an application component in TypeScript, there are several new paradigms that you must become familiar and comfortable with. Though possibly intimidating initially, you will find that you'll be able to carry over much of your comprehension of Angular 1 directives. The code, links, and a live example related to this solution are available at ngcookbook.herokuapp.com. This is the link. Here you can find code and live examples related to using decorators. One of the simplest imaginable components we can build is a template element that interpolates some values into its template. In Angular 1, one way this could be achieved was by creating an element directive, attaching some data to the scope inside the link function, and a template that would reference the data. I selected this description specifically because nearly all those concepts have been binned. So, now we will create a simple article component with a pseudo template that looks like this. We will be creating a component that will live inside its own HTML tag, render the template, and interpolate the values. So, let's see how to do it. The elemental building block of Angular 2 applications is the component. This component could generally be defined with two pieces, the core class definition and the class decoration. Now we will learn about writing the class definition. All Angular 2 components begin as a class. This class is used to instantiate the component, and any data required inside the component template will be accessible from the class's properties. Thus, the foundational class for the component would appear like this. This is the article .component.ts file. Here are a few things to note for those who are new to TypeScript or ES6 in general. You will note the class definition is prefixed with an export keyword, as you can see. This is adherence to the new ES6 module convention, which naturally is also part of TypeScript. Assuming the article class is defined in the foo.ts file, it can be imported to a different module using the import keyword, and the path to that module would be import open curly brace article close curly brace from ./foo. This assumes that the importing file is in the same directory as foo.ts. The title definition uses the new ES6 template string syntax, a pair of backticks instead of the traditional set of quotes. You will find you become quite fond of this, as it means the plus messiness formerly used to define multi-line templates would no longer be necessary. all the properties of this class are typed. Typescript's typing syntax takes the form of property name property type is equal to the optional init value. JavaScript is, of course, a loosely typed language, and JavaScript is what the browser is interpreting in this case. However, writing your application in TypeScript allows you to utilize type safety at compile time, which will allow you to avoid undesirable and unanticipated behavior. All ES6 classes come with a predefined constructor method, which is invoked upon instantiation. Here, you are using the constructor to instantiate the properties of the class, which is a perfectly fine strategy for member initialization. Having the member property definition outside the constructor is allowed, since it is useful for adding types to properties. Thus, here you are simply obviating the use of the constructor, since you are able to add a type and assign the value in the same line. A more succinct style could be like this. With the same name you can see here, the Typescript compiler will automatically move the member initialization process inside the class constructor. So, this version and the previous one are behaviorally identical. Now we will see how the component class decorator is written. Although you have created a class that has information associated with it, it does not yet have a way to interface with the DOM. Furthermore, this class is yet to be assigned with any meaning in the context of Angular 2. You can accomplish this with decorators. Decorators are a feature of TypeScript, but not by any means unique to the language. Python developers, among many others, should be quite familiar with the concept of class modulation via explicit decoration. Generally speaking, it allows you to have a regularized modification of the defined classes using separately defined decorators. However, in Angular 2, you will be largely utilizing the decorators provided to you by the framework to declare the various framework elements. Decorators such as @component are defined in the Angular source code as component functions, and the function is applied as a decorator using the @rate symbol. An @rate prefix signals that the imported function should be applied as a decorator. These decorators are visually obvious, but will usually not exist by themselves or with an empty object's literal. This is because Angular 2 decorators are generally made useful by their decorator metadata. This concept can be made more concrete here using the predefined component decorator. Nothing is available for free in Angular 2. In order to use the component decorator, it must be imported from the Angular 2 core module into the module that wishes to use it. You can then prepend this component to the class definition. So, this is the component to this class definition. As mentioned before, the @rate component decorator accepts a component metadata object, which in the code is just an empty object literal. Conceptually, this metadata object is very similar to the directive definition object in Angular 1. Here we need to provide the decorator metadata object with two properties, namely selector and template. So, we have to add the selector template, which is to be added after the component. Note that selector is the string that will be used to find where the component should be inserted in the DOM, and template is obviously the stringified HTML template. With all this, you will be able to see your article component in action with the article tag. The class definition has supplanted the Angular 1 concept of having a controller. The component instances of this class have member properties that can be interpolated and bound into the template, similar to scope in Angular 1. In the template, the interpolation and the data binding processes seem to occur much in the same way they did in Angular 1. This is not actually the case, which is visited in greater detail later in this video. The built-in date modifier, which resembles an Angular 1 filter, is now dubbed with a pipe, although it works in a very similar fashion. The selector metadata property is a string representing a CSS selector. In this definition, you target all the occurrences of an article tag, but the selector specificity and detail is, of course, able to handle a great deal of additional complexity. use this to your advantage. So now we need to work on index.html file, where we need to make certain modifications in the lines of code to get the desired output. This is the index.html file, and this is the body part. This is the article tag, which is used to specify the independent, self-contained content. Then save the file. Now it's time to display the output. For viewing the output on the local host, we need to run this command in CMD. So it will run the HTTP server. Then we need to open the directory where the file is saved. So for that, type cd space my workspace and enter. Type this next command to see the output. http:/server space -0. The server is getting started. It will take a while. Here is our output. Great! The concept that must be internalized for Angular 2 neophytes is the total encapsulation of a component. This video will go into further detail about the different abilities of the component metadata object, but the paradigm they and all class decorators introduce is the concept that Angular 2 components are self-describing. By examining the class definition, you can wholly reason the data, service, class, and injectable dependencies. In Angular 1, this was just not possible because of the scope soup pattern. One could argue that in Angular 1, CSS styling was a second-class citizen. This is no longer the case with components, as the metadata object offers robust support for complex styling. For example, to italicize the author in your article component, use this code in article.component.ts file. These are the lines of code we need to add. Angular 2 will use this styles property and compile it into a generated style sheet, which it will then apply to only this component. You do not have to worry about the rest of the HTML h3 tags being inadvertently styled. This is because Angular 2's generated style sheet will ensure that only this component and its children are subject to the CSS rules listed in the metadata object. Now we will save the changes done in article.component.ts file. So, this is the index.html file, and this is the body part. This is the article tag, which is used to specify the independent, self-contained content. Then save the file and refresh the local host to observe the changes. Cool! Here is the output, where we can see the statement in italic style. This is intended to emulate the total modularity of web components. However, since web components do not yet have universal support, Angular 2's design essentially performs a polyfill for this behavior. That brings us to the end of this video. In this video, we have learned about using decorators to build and style a simple component. Amazing!